Outlaw bikers mocked the wrong combat nurse at a gas station. The gas station was nearly deserted, the low hum of a flickering neon sign above casting a sickly green glow over the cracked pavement. It was late, well past midnight, and the air was thick with the smell of gasoline and distant rain. The only other occupants of the station were a pack of outlaw bikers, their heavily customized Harleys lined up like a row of metal beasts, each one covered in skull decals and threatening insignias. Darla Hayes stepped out of her dusty Jeep, stretching after a long, grueling drive. She had just returned stateside from her third tour overseas as a combat nurse and was finally making her way home. Dressed in worn jeans and a simple black tank top, her toned arms bore the marks of a soldier's life, faint scars, a tattoo of a medical cross, and a bracelet woven from paracord, given to her by a fallen comrade's family. She barely glanced at the bikers as she made her way toward the pump. They, however, noticed her immediately. A towering man with a gray beard and a vest covered in patches, most notably one that read, Reaper's MC, elbowed his buddy and let out a low whistle. Well, what do we have here? He mused, loud enough for her to hear. Another one, younger but just as grizzled, grinned. Looks like someone wandered into the wrong station at the wrong time. You lost, sweetheart? Darla ignored them and started fueling up her Jeep. She had encountered men like this before, loud, crude, and full of misplaced confidence. In a combat zone, they would have been the ones who cracked under pressure. But they weren't done. Hey, babe, don't you know this is Reaper territory? One sneered. A little thing like you shouldn't be out alone at night. Dangerous folks around. The group chuckled, the sound like rusted chains scraping together. Darla finally turned, fixing them with a stare that had silenced panicked soldiers under mortar fire. I appreciate the concern, she said flatly, but I can handle myself. The leader smirked, taking a step closer. Oh yeah? Handle yourself how? You some kind of cop? Combat nurse, she corrected. A few of them laughed outright. One with a snake tattoo winding up his neck scoffed. So what? You hand out band-aids in war zones? Patch up real men when they get hurt? Something inside Darla tightened, but she didn't react. She had dealt with worse, not just from enemy fire but from ignorance like this. Something like that, she said. The leader, clearly feeling emboldened, leaned in. Well, sweetheart, if you need someone to, his hand barely brushed her shoulder before she moved. Darla shifted her weight and twisted his wrist in one fluid motion, forcing the big man down onto his knees before he could even process what was happening. His cry of surprise turned into a pained grunt as she applied just the right amount of pressure. The other bikers jumped up, but before they could react, she spoke, her voice cold and precise. You think because I'm a nurse, I'm weak? She twisted his arm slightly, making him groan. I've stopped bleeding with my bare hands, carried men twice your size through gunfire, and seen things that would make you wake up screaming. You think I'm scared of you? The other bikers hesitated. This wasn't what they expected. They had assumed she was just some easy mark, someone they could tease and intimidate. But this woman? This was something else. She released the leader and stepped back, letting him stumble to his feet, his face red with fury and embarrassment. For a moment, he looked like he might retaliate, until he caught the look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had seen death and didn't fear it. Darla took a step closer, her voice low. Now, unless one of you has a real medical emergency, I'd suggest you back off before you need more than a band-aid. The silence stretched between them. Then, grudgingly, the leader nodded. Respect, he muttered, rubbing his wrist. Darla didn't wait for any more words. She finished fueling up, got back in her Jeep, and drove off, leaving the stunned bikers behind. As she disappeared into the night, one of the younger ones muttered, I think we just got schooled. The leader exhaled and shook his head. That, he admitted, was the wrong woman to mess with. And with that, the Reaper's MC learned a lesson they wouldn't forget anytime soon. Darla's Jeep rumbled down the empty highway, her fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. She had dealt with plenty of cocky men before. Arrogant doctors in military hospitals, new recruits thinking they were untouchable, and even enemy combatants who underestimated her because she didn't carry a rifle. But something about that encounter gnawed at her. Maybe it was the way the leader, probably their president, had looked at her before she left. It wasn't just anger. It was calculation. She shook it off and focused on the road. She was still 2 hours from home, and all she wanted was to crash into her own bed for the first time in years. Behind her, though, trouble was brewing. The Reapers next moved back at the gas station. The bikers stood in tense silence. The leader, Tank, flexed his wrist, scowling. He wasn't used to being handled like that, much less by someone who looked like she weighed half of what he did. One of the younger members, Ace, whistled. Man, she took you down quick. You gonna let that slide, Prez? Tank shot him a glare. Shut your mouth, kid. He exhaled sharply, glancing down the highway where Darla had disappeared. She's military, growled Snake, the one with the tattoo on his neck. You saw the way she moved. That wasn't just some nurse, man. That was combat training. Tank nodded slowly. Yeah, and she made me look weak in front of my own crew. Another biker, Rip, cracked his knuckles. So what? We just let her ride off like that? Tank was quiet for a long moment, then said, No. We remind her that nobody embarrasses the Reapers and just drives away. The men exchanged looks, some grinning, some hesitant. Prez, Snake said cautiously, if she's really military, maybe we should. I don't care what she is, Tank snapped. She's a woman who just humiliated us in front of each other. And we don't let that slide. Get on your bikes. We're gonna have a little chat with our nurse. The Reapers fired up their engines and roared onto the highway, chasing after the lone Jeep, disappearing into the night. The chase begins. Darla noticed them in her rearview mirror before she even heard them. A pack of headlights in formation, moving too fast to be random travelers. Her jaw tightened. She had been hoping the bikers would just take their bruised egos and leave it at that. But some men couldn't handle being bested, especially by a woman. She inhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. Panic got people killed in war zones, and she wasn't about to lose her edge now. Her Jeep wasn't built for speed, but it had power. She pressed the gas, picking up speed, but the bikers weren't backing off. They were gaining. She considered her options. She could try to outrun them, but that wouldn't work for long. The road was dark and winding, and she didn't want to risk flipping her vehicle. No, she needed another plan. Up ahead, she spotted an old abandoned rest stop, a relic from the pre-interstate days. It was just off the highway, overgrown with weeds and barely visible in the moonlight. But it was exactly what she needed. Darla took a deep breath, then did something unexpected. She slammed the brakes. The Jeep screeched, tires screaming against the pavement, and the bikers swerved wildly to avoid crashing into her. The sudden maneuver caught them off guard, breaking their formation. Before they could regroup, she yanked the wheel and veered off the road, heading straight for the abandoned rest stop. A trap is set. Tank skidded to a stop, cursing. He saw Darla's taillights disappear behind the trees. She's running, Ace said. She's cornered, Tank corrected. She just made this easier. He motioned for the others to follow, and they rumbled after her, confident they were about to teach this woman a lesson. But as they pulled into the lot, something felt off. The Jeep was there, engine running. The driver's side door was open. But Darla? Gone. Snake frowned, scanning the area. Where the hell did she? A blur of movement. A shadow leapt from the darkness. Crack. Ace went down hard, clutching his face where Darla had just slammed an elbow into his jaw. Before the others could react, she was already moving again. She kicked Snake's knee out from under him, sending him sprawling, spun on her heel, and drove her fist into Rip's gut, knocking the wind out of him. Tank barely had time to register what was happening before Darla was standing in front of him, eyes blazing. You really thought I'd run? She asked. Tank swung at her. It was a mistake. Darla dodged easily, caught his arm mid-swing, and wrenched it behind his back in a brutal hold. He grunted in pain as she kicked out his leg, dropping him to the ground. The other bikers, groaning and disoriented, hesitated. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. Darla leaned in close to Tank's ear. Listen to me, and listen good. I've patched up men who got shot fighting for this country, but I've also put down threats when I had to. I can make sure every single one of you leaves here with something broken if you push me. Tank breathed heavily, struggling against her hold but unable to break free. "You leave me alone," she continued, "and I leave you mostly intact. We got a deal?" Tank hesitated, then nodded. Darla shoved him away. "Get on your bikes and ride out of here. And if I ever see you again, I won't be so polite." The bikers, humiliated and beaten, helped each other up. No one spoke. They just got on their bikes and sped off into the night. Darla watched them go, then exhaled. She wiped the sweat from her brow, walked back to her jeep, and climbed in. With a small smirk, she muttered, "Guess some people just need a reminder." Then she drove off into the night, leaving the Reapers with a lesson they'd never forget. Darla drove in silence, the adrenaline fading as the distant roar of motorcycle engines disappeared behind her. She knew men like that wouldn't forget the beating she had given them, but she also knew their type. Some would be too embarrassed to ever speak of it again. Others? They'd want revenge. She kept her eyes on the road, checking the rearview mirror every few minutes. If they had any sense left, they'd stay away. Or so she hoped. A final confrontation about 30 minutes later. She saw it. Headlights. They weren't coming fast, but they were steady. Following. Darla sighed. These guys just don't learn. She had no intention of playing cat and mouse all night. If they wanted to finish this, she'd oblige. She spotted a narrow dirt road ahead, barely visible in the dark. Without hesitation, she jerked the wheel and turned onto it, kicking up a cloud of dust. The road twisted through a wooded area, leading to a rocky clearing she had noticed on a map earlier. A place where she could see them coming. She shut off her headlights and waited. Seconds later, the bikers pulled in. 4 of them this time. Tank, Snake, Rip, and a new face. A massive brute with arms like tree trunks. This one wasn't with them earlier. Darla stepped out of her jeep, standing tall, her hands at her sides. Tank dismounted first. His lip was bleeding from their last fight, and his knuckles were white as he gripped his handlebars. "You should have just driven home, lady," he growled. "You should have left me alone," Darla countered. "But I get it. You needed to bring backup because you couldn't handle me yourselves." The big guy, who must have been a higher-ranking Reaper, smirked. "Tank told me you gave him trouble," he said. "I figured I'd come see for myself." Darla rolled her shoulders, cracking her neck. "Hope you like disappointment." Snake pulled a knife. "Enough talking." Darla smirked. "There it is." "You sure you want to do this?" she asked. Snake lunged. Darla moved fast, sidestepping, grabbing his wrist, and slamming his arm down over her knee with a sickening crack. Snake howled, the knife clattering to the ground. Before Rip could react, Darla grabbed the fallen blade, flipped it in her grip, and pressed it to his throat. "One more step, and I see what color you bleed," she warned. Tank hesitated, his hand twitching toward his gun. Darla's eyes locked onto his. "You thinking about pulling that?" she asked. "Go ahead. See how fast you are before I put this knife in your neck." The big guy, who had been grinning moments ago, suddenly wasn't. Tank swallowed hard. This is getting out of hand." Darla pressed the knife just a little closer to Rip's throat. "No, it got out of hand when you decided to chase me down like some scared little boys trying to prove something." The big guy took a step back, lifting his hands. "This ain't worth it, Tank. Let's go." Rip whimpered as Darla released him, shoving him back toward the others. She didn't take her eyes off them as she backed toward her jeep. "I told you once. Now I'm telling you again. If you ever come after me again, I will end you. You understand?" Tank nodded stiffly. "Yeah." Darla climbed into her jeep and turned it on. As she drove away, she saw the bikers standing in stunned silence, their egos shattered. This time, she knew for sure, they wouldn't be coming back. She smiled to herself. Some people just needed to be taught a lesson the hard way, and she was more than happy to be their teacher.